Indonesia is certainly not the first country that one thinks of when studying Buddhism. Similarly, Buddhism is not the first religion that one thinks of when studying the country of Indonesia. If these notions are set aside, though, one can discover the important relationship between Buddhism and Indonesia and how the two have influenced one another throughout history. Islam, Catholicism, Protestantism, and Hinduism all claim more followers in the country of Indonesia than Buddhism does. In fact, according to the 1990 census, there were approximately 1.8 million Buddhists in Indonesia, which out of 222 million people comprises only slightly more than 1% of the population. However, despite the proportionally small population of practicing Buddhists living in Indonesia today, there is a historically rich and diverse Buddhist tradition in this country, dating back to the 2nd century CE. I shall address this Indonesian Buddhist tradition by describing the arrival of Buddhism in Indonesia and its development and evolution as it spread. I will then take a look at how Buddhism influenced the major Indonesian empires from the 2nd century CE until the Islamic takeover of the region, including the construction of the Temple of Borobudur and its relationship to Buddhist practitioners. Finally, I will address the revival of Indonesian Buddhism in the modern era and how it has been affected by the government of Indonesia. The arrival of Buddhism in Indonesia started when traders came to the country from India by traveling along the Silk Road. This route was a connected series of smaller trade routes through southern Asia, stretching from Europe to the Pacific Ocean, that has been used for thousands of years by all of the major civilizations that have existed in this part of the world. In addition to a route for commerce, the Silk Road was also utilized by religious travelers, including the monks who originally introduced Buddhism to Indonesia. In approximately 250 BCE, the Third Buddhist Council was convened under the direction of Emperor Asoka, who had recently converted to Buddhism. Among the accomplishments of this council was the decision to send missionaries out in all directions who were well versed in Buddhism's official doctrine, the Dharma. Some of these missionaries invariably departed in the direction of Indonesia. Around the same time that Buddhism was beginning to arrive in Indonesia, Hinduism was also appearing. Because of their coinciding introductions to the Indonesian peoples, the two religions became closely related and influenced one another as uniquely Indonesian forms of the two religions emerged. For example, unlike in other parts of the world, Hinduism in Indonesia never applied the caste system to its citizens, and some scholars think that this was in part because of the close original ties to Buddhism. There is little written evidence available from this earliest time period Buddhism's existence in Indonesia, but its influence is evident in the later evolution of the religion as well as the evolution of Hinduism. Furthermore, there are several Buddhist statues that have been dated to the time period from before any official Buddhist empire or congregation is known to have existed. After Buddhism's arrival in Indonesia, it quickly began to develop and attract more followers, and this can be seen in the influence the religion has had on the major empires in Indonesia from the 200s all the way to around 1500 CE. Chronologically, the first major empire in Indonesia that had a significant relationship to Buddhism was the Srivijaya, an ancient Malay kingdom on the island of Sumatra, reigning from the 200s to 1400 CE. At its height of power, the Srivijaya kingdom was the largest Buddhist kingdom in all of Southeast Asia. The exact origins of the kingdom are unknown because of the lack of documentation, but by the 7th century, it was clearly a stronghold of Vajrayana Buddhism. We know this because the Chinese Buddhist monk Yi Jing made several extended visits to Sumatra on his way to study at the university in India in both 671 and 695. He wrote that more than 1,000 Buddhist scholars lived within the kingdom of Srivijaya, and in fact, Yi Jing became attached to the area and chose to write his memoir in Indonesia. Furthermore, Srivijaya attracted pilgrims and scholars from other parts of Asia, including the Bengali Buddhist scholar Atisha during the 11th century. Atisha, who played a major role in the development of Vajrayana Buddhism in Tibet, also fostered this Tibetan form of Buddhism in Indonesia. Srivijaya flourished for centuries, but eventually went on to decline due to the emergence of Islam as the dominant religion in Indonesia. The final remaining royal member of the Srivijayan dynasty converted to Islam in 1414, and the Buddhist kingdom was extinguished forever. In addition to the Srivijaya, a kingdom that had very specific ties to Buddhism, was the Sailendra kingdom, which became the leading power in Java in the 8th and 9th centuries CE. This dynasty was very closely related to the Srivijaya, and the two empires formed an alliance that included intermarriage and mutual agreement of trade rights along the Silk Road and other routes. Two very important things distinguish the Buddhist relationship to Sailendra. One is that Sailendra's economy was based on the cultivation of rice paddies, and the kingdom used Buddhism to its advantage economically. Wet rice requires extensive work on drainage, canals, and terracing. A lineage which can mobilize labor for more than one basin can dominate other local lineages. The Sailendra mobilized labor across the boundaries of each basin by the use of symbolic power associated with the use of Hindu and Buddhist rituals, including Sanskrit inscriptions, an Indianized court, and the construction of a Kretan, temples, and monuments. The Sailendra effectively used Buddhism as a part of the unification process to not only establish the kingdom, but also to strengthen its power and its economy. The second key feature of the Sailendra kingdom is another example of the mobilization of labor, but in this case it was not to harvest rice crops. The most significant accomplishment of the Sailendra was the creation of the Borobudur temple complex, built between 778 and 824 CE. This is one of the single greatest physical monuments ever constructed within the tradition of Buddhism. According to the tradition, it was built to resemble a microcosm of the universe, and its purpose was to provide a visual image of the teachings of the Buddha and show in a practical manner the steps through life that each person must follow to achieve enlightenment. The temple is extremely massive and was carved out of 60,000 cubic meters of volcanic rock. For centuries, it was abandoned, and it was not until the year 1814 that it was rediscovered by Sir Thomas Raffles of Great Britain. A great restoration process took place, and the temple was renovated in multiple phases from 1905 to 1983. Today, Borobudur is an extremely important location for both Buddhist pilgrims and tourists. By the most reliable accounts available, the Sailendra kingdom was overtaken by a rival Hindu kingdom, showing that although at some points the two religions peacefully coexisted, there were still conflicts that occurred at other times. The third empire that I will address is the Majapahit kingdom, which was an Indianized kingdom based in eastern Java, lasting from 1293 to around 1500 CE. Although this was actually a Hindu kingdom, Buddhism peacefully coexisted with Hinduism during the reign of the Majapahit emperors. In fact, there were heavy influences of Buddhism that can be seen in the culture of the people who lived here. This kingdom was the last of the Hindu and Buddhist kingdoms and is considered by many scholars to be a high point in Indonesian culture and civilization. Just as with the Srivijaya kingdom, it came to an end because of the overwhelming dominance of Islam in Indonesia. The influence of Buddhism would sharply decline at this point, remaining largely dormant until its revival in the 20th century. More than 4 centuries after the fall of the last pre-Islamic kingdom in Indonesia, there was a notable revival of Buddhism beginning in 1934. Narada Tera, a famous missionary monk from Sri Lanka, visited Indonesia on his travels in Southeast Asia, and local Buddhists used this as an opportunity to start a revival of their religion. This was a largely symbolic event that did not accomplish much of a substantial revival until 1955, when Buddhism started to make a comeback as the monk Ashin Jinarakita started a journey across Indonesia to spread the Dharma. This sparked a revival of the Theravadan Buddhism, the form that originally had been brought by the first missionaries sent from India along the Silk Road. The Vajrayana tradition, which is an offshoot of Mahayana Buddhism, is still well represented alongside the Theravadan tradition. Today, many Buddhist places of worship in Indonesia will hold religious services in all of the various Buddhist traditions, focusing on the unity and similarity between the sects instead of the differences between them. In the 20th and into the 21st century, similar to when the ruling kingdom would control the policy of religion in Indonesia, Buddhism is subject to— which is the original philosophical basis of the Indonesian state. This philosophy, modeled on the original Pancasila, which was a Buddhist code of ethics, was proposed by future President Sukarno as a tool to help unite the people of Indonesia and incite patriotism among the diverse religious and cultural groups. It was then instituted as official policy within the Indonesian state. There are 5 basic principles, including a belief in the one and only God. Clearly, this posed a problem for Buddhism because it is not often seen as a monotheistic